Fight for the Unborn, a recap of this week's efforts to protect life in the U.S., including in Ohio, where the state's governor signed a heartbeat bill. That's the ticket. The White House screens a recent pro-life movie. We'll have a report. A gift from God. As Pope Francis pushes for peace in South Sudan's political crisis, we'll talk to an official who met with the country's leaders. And this story has all the ingredients. The co-author of the best-selling Vatican Cookbook talks to us about its unique collection of recipes, art, and stories from the Swiss Guard. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, April 12, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Abortion groups get ready to sue Ohio. The state's governor yesterday signed the heartbeat bill, which would ban most abortions after an unborn baby's heartbeat is detected. The bill's backers say a legal fight is exactly what they want. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi takes a look at this fight for life. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. 7 states passed the heartbeat bill. Courts have struck down some of those bans. That was the reason former Ohio Governor John Kasich vetoed it twice. But a new governor brings a new day for pro-life Ohioans. Governor Mike DeWine's signature will stop Ohio abortions when a heartbeat can be heard. That could be around 6 weeks.
Government's role should be to protect life from the beginning to the end, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, such as the elderly, the unborn, those who are sick.
But NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio calls it a dystopian nightmare where people are forced to continue pregnancies regardless of the harm that may come to them or their family. And the ACLU of Ohio plans to sue. 7 other states passed heartbeat bills. 4 have been struck down or blocked. Mississippi's faces a court battle, and Georgia's waits for the governor's signature. The bill's backers tell me they want this legal challenge, a case to challenge Supreme Court abortion precedent, which allows abortion up to viability.
This is patently unconstitutional.
Law professor David Forte helped write the country's very first heartbeat bill in Ohio.
What you keep doing is you keep knocking at that door. That's what you did on Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal. There were 6 or 7 cases before Brown versus Board of Education. You keep knocking at that door. That's the strategy.
We spoke in 2017 when he testified to Congress on his bill.
We say, fine, we'll take it up to the Supreme Court and let the Supreme Court rethink that notion of viability and hopefully overrule it and come back to our viewpoint.
His state's heartbeat bill goes into effect in July. But some pro-life groups will not endorse the heartbeat bill. Tennessee's bishops, for example, say it's not prudent to support. They say it's already been struck down in other states. It'll lead to costly lawsuits, and they add state money will then go to pay legal fees of those abortion groups. Wyatt?
And Jason, I understand even more states are debating their own heartbeat bills.
Yeah, similar bills have been introduced in a number of other states. Alabama is considering a bill that would go even further. It would outlaw abortion unless the mother's health is at risk. Pro-life lawmakers feel new motivation with President Trump's 2 picks now sitting across the street on the high court.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. It's movie night at the White House. Tonight's screening of the pro-life film Gosnell comes as the White House slams Democrats' recent push for late-term abortion laws. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports from inside the press briefing room. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. A screening of the 2018 film Gosnell has brought a large pro-life crowd here to the White House. The film focuses on the true story of Kermit Gosnell, a Philadelphia abortionist, now serving life in prison for murdering babies born alive in his clinic.
Kermit Gosnell is perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history.
Filmmakers bring their movie to the White House.
We made the Gosnell movie, it was a huge success, and now tonight it is screening in the White House. It's unbelievable, 5 years later.
Those are the producers of the film Gosnell in Washington before today's screening. They say this is the first political movie showcased in the Trump White House.
Nothing that man did that protects women or children, and you don't have to be a pro-life activist to see that.
In In a statement, the White House says Kermit Gosnell was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder for killing babies by cutting their spines after he botched the abortions, and this film is a startling reminder of these horrific atrocities. It goes on to say Democrats now defend this procedure, in part referring to a lack of Democratic votes for a Born-Alive Infant Protection Act in Congress. In the White House seats watching Gosnell tonight, 150 pro-life leaders, including the group Students for Life. They say films like this are important, writing, "Horror lurks behind the closed doors of abortion vendors, and one way to protect women and their preborn children is to let them know about the kinds of things that can happen in abortion locations."
The producers of another pro-life film, Unplanned, in theaters now, were here earlier this week. They met with Vice President Mike Pence, who says life is winning because of powerful stories like Unplanned. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. The Secret Service says a man set himself on fire outside the White House this afternoon. Officers responded immediately and extinguished the fire. Our Mark Irons shot this video as Secret Service carried the man away. The man was transported to a local hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Authorities have not released any other details at this time. The leader of Britain's Labour Party says the government should oppose the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. Jeremy Corbyn says the U.S. wants to prosecute the WikiLeaks founder because he exposed evidence of atrocities in Iraq and Afghanistan. Assange remains in jail in London. He faces conspiracy charges from the Justice Department. Today, his mother made a plea for authorities to be, quote, gentle and kind to him. Protesters in Sudan reject the military's claim it has no plans to hold power long term. Earlier this week, the Sudanese army ousted President Omar al-Bashir after 30 years in power. Officials say it was not a coup and left open the possibility of a future civilian government. South Sudan's opposition leader says the Holy Father's intervention for peace in his country is a gift from God.
Pope Francis made it possible for me to come here and participate. My participation with President Salva has given a new momentum.
In a powerful gesture, Pope Francis knelt and kissed the feet of South Sudan's rival leaders Thursday. The Vatican hosted a 2-day spiritual retreat that ended yesterday. The Holy Father welcomed President Salva Kiir, seen with the hat on the left, and his opponent Riek Machar on the right. In 2013, the country plunged into a bloody civil war, which has left at least 400,000 people dead. Mauro Garofalo is the International Relations Officer for the Community of Sant'Egidio, a Catholic group focused on prayer, peace, and the poor. He joins us now from Rome. Mauro, after the spiritual retreat at the Vatican, your community held a prayer vigil with the opposition leader. What impact did the retreat overall have on both sides, on both leaders?
I think we lived an historic moment here in Rome, and the spiritual retreat was really a momentum for the peace process in South Sudan. I felt from the people of the opposition, from the representative of the opposition, a great pressure to achieve finally peace. We are talking about the youngest country on earth, and since 2011, the day of the independence, they did not have a real moment of peace. Now, today we are at a turning point.
As you know, in neighboring Sudan, the military has overthrown and arrested the president there, Omar al-Bashir, and has taken charge of the country for at least the next 2 years. South Sudan, as you mentioned, gained independence in 2011. So do you think the instability in Sudan will upset the peace process in South Sudan?
It will for sure influence the process, but we all think that from these days in Rome, and also because of the achievements the peace process got in the last month, it is highly time for South Sudanese responsibles and people to take their destiny in their own hands. So it will for sure have some effects, but we hope that we will overcome this.
Your community has worked closely over the years in South Sudan, which is about 40% Catholic, 60% Christian. What is the situation like for everyday people, and what role does faith play in the conflict?
Well, all these years of conflict and instability has weakened the social tissue of the social fabric of the country, and people are suffering. We are talking about an emergency, a level 3 emergency according to international community. with peace, with the implementation, with the achievement of peace, there is a big way ahead. Many things still must be done. But at the same time, if all the voices, and it's a critical issue, but all the voices which are in the agreement will be implemented, probably the situation of the people will be improved a lot. That's what we hope, and that's what we work for, also together with the South Sudan Council of Churches, which is an important tool to achieve reconciliation and lasting reconciliation in the country.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be praying for that peace process and praying for the work that you do in your community. Mauro Garofalo in the Community of Sant'Egidio, coming to us from Rome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, a bishop's message to his diocese as he releases a list of clergy accused of abuse. And a Democratic presidential candidate blasts Mike Pence's faith, how the vice president responded. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The Catholic Diocese for Southwest Louisiana releases information on 12 clergy members who officials say were credibly accused of sexual abuse.
My heart is heavy as I realize the serious harm done to innocent victims and the breaking of sacred trust between clergy and faithful.
Bishop Glenn John Provost of the Diocese of St. Charles says he believes they reviewed and acted upon every report they've received. Of the 12 named, 8 are dead, 2 are in jail, 1 is sentenced to a life of prayer and penance, and 1 is prohibited from ministry. Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg goes from a friend of Vice President Mike Pence to one of his biggest critics. The two worked together in Indiana politics. Now, Buttigieg is especially critical of the vice president's cultural and religious conservatism. The mayor of South Bend is openly gay and has fought for the redefinition of marriage. Vice President Pence responded to Buttigieg's criticism by saying all Americans are entitled to their religious beliefs.
My wife and I are Bible-believing Christians. We cherish our faith. We put our trust in God's Word, as do tens of millions of Americans. And I think as he seeks the highest office of the land, as he seeks to be that person that takes the oath of office to uphold the Constitution, he'd do well to reflect on the importance of respecting the freedom of religion of every American.
And Matthew Continetti, co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, joins me now with more analysis. Matthew, welcome back to the broadcast. What do you make of this war of words between the vice president and Democrat Pete Buttigieg?
Well, it's a war of words that Buttigieg started only about 10 days ago. You know, when Buttigieg was mayor of South Bend and Pence was still the governor of Indiana, the two got along very well. They had nothing but kind words to say for one another. Now that Buttigieg has his eye on the Democratic presidential nomination, however, he knows that Mike Pence and religious believers are boogeymen in the eyes of many Democrats. And so he's setting aim and firing at Pence. It's a rather dishonest performance on Buttigieg's part, in my view.
Yeah, clearly a political move here. I want to turn to immigration because there was a lot of important news that came out this week. This week we saw the resignation of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. And today the president tweeted he's giving, quote, strong consideration to releasing detained undocumented immigrants into sanctuary cities. Does that seem to be a contradiction of what the administration said earlier on the position?
Well, I think there's a deep frustration on the part of President Trump, one, that he's been unable to control this crisis at the border. And then two, more broadly among Trump's supporters, that many progressives and advocates for open borders or more liberal immigration laws never really face the consequences of the policies they espouse. So I think what Trump is doing here is kind of calling the bluff and saying to people like Nancy Pelosi, well, if you're such a supporter of more liberal immigration policies, how would you like it if all of a sudden your city has filled with illegal immigrants? It's kind of a clever riposte by Trump. I'm not sure if it's actually going to solve the crisis on the border.
Let me follow up with you on that, because you mentioned Nancy Pelosi, and the president also stated in that tweet that it should make the, quote, radical left happy. You mentioned House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called the idea, though, of putting immigrants in sanctuary cities, as the president has proposed, disrespectful and unworthy of the presidency. So then, if the president, the administration carries out the plan, would it be political retaliation?
I think, again, it would be kind of saying to Democrats and saying to the left, well, if you want open borders, This is the consequence. You're going to have a lot of illegal immigrants and people who are exploiting loopholes in immigration law on your doorstep. I think this is a way for the president, rhetorically at least for now, to up the pressure on the Democrats. The only way we're going to solve the crisis on the border is if Congress addresses these loopholes in immigration law that are incentivizing family units to travel from Central America and apply for asylum once they reach the United States. Congress needs to address those loopholes in order for us to stop this problem on the border. And if the only way to do that is to say to the Democrats, well, look, we're going to make sure you feel the consequences of the surge in illegal immigration, maybe that's a strategy worth pursuing. I'm not sure that particular strategy will work, though.
We'll see how it plays out in the coming weeks. Just yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called for bipartisan talk aimed at bolstering asylum laws and addressing the border security. Do you think there's any prospects of bipartisan talks actually working?
Probably unlikely, because I think both parties would like this issue to be live in the 2020 presidential election. And I think President Trump in particular understands that when the issue is border security, he has the advantage. And if the issue is, say, family separation policy, that issue goes to the Democrats' advantage. So President Trump wants to keep everyone focused on the issue of border security and the fact that Democrats are uninterested in addressing the roots of this problem in our immigration law. That's a good issue for him as he goes into his re-election campaign.
Yeah, no doubt it's going to be a big issue coming up in the next year. Matthew Continetti, co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Up next, the Vatican Cookbook, an inside look at Pope Francis and his predecessors' favorite dishes. And Catholics climb the newly restored Holy Stairs in Rome. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. An internationally acclaimed cookbook is giving readers a taste of life in Vatican City. The Vatican Cookbook is a unique collection of behind-the-scenes photographs and recipes served at Vatican tables for centuries. Thomas Kelly, one of the co-authors of the book, joins me now. Tom, welcome into the broadcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Wyatt.
This book was originally published in 2016, and it only seems to be getting more popular from here. What inspired you to kind of take a look at the Vatican in this way? Because it's not only food, but it's also sort of through the lens of the Swiss Guard.
It is, and we have to give the Swiss Guard all the credit. They created the original book, which was published in 2015.
Okay.
Then we acquired it for American publication and distribution and rewrote it somewhat and added some more pictures. And we think it's turned out just great.
Like I said, beautiful photographs of the Swiss Guard, as well as recipes for some favorite dishes of Pope Francis, Pope Benedict XVI, even St. John Paul II. The pierogi in particular recipe featured in the book has a special connection to John Paul II. Tell me about that.
It does. If you remember, Pope John Paul II was shot in 1981, almost died. It was near miraculous that the Swiss Guard and a great team of doctors managed to save his life. And it was a few days until he could even consult with his doctors. And they told him then, Your Holiness, you were severely wounded, and it's going to be many months recuperating, and you're going to have to be on a very restricted diet for a long, long time. And the Pope said, that's fine, except I have to have my pierogies. And they tried to argue with him, and the Pope said, I'm the Pope. I want my pierogies. And
he ended up getting it.
He did. And he credited his very quick recovery to the pierogies.
Wow, that's incredible. The recipes also include some for Pope Francis. Gives a little bit different flavor, sort of native Argentina.
Yes.
Tell us about his Argentine empanadas on pepper salad.
The empanadas is a great recipe. It's not so easy, but not so hard. There's another recipe for Pope Francis that's called pizza a cavallo, and that translates to pizza on horseback. There's another layer on top of the pizza. And that's because at a press conference a few years ago, they asked the Pope, is there anything you'd like to do that you can't do, Your Holiness? And he said, yeah, I'd like to go down the street and get a pizza someday. So that's in the book also.
Very, very interesting. The book also shares several table prayers to say before meals. How do you think this, or tell me about how this project supports efforts to end hunger around the world?
Well, if you read toward the back of the book, there's a section on the Swiss Guards' dedication to one of the Pope's favorite charities, which is One Human Family, Food for All, which has already made great progress in ending severe hunger in the world. And their goal is to wipe out severe hunger by, I believe it's the year 2025, and a portion of the proceeds of the book go to One Human Family, Food for All, and we, along with Pope Francis, invite everyone else to join us in that.
Tom, my understanding is that the Vatican Cookbook also offers fundraising opportunities for Catholic parishes and organizations.
It does. Thanks, Wyatt. We've learned that parishes can use the book a number of ways, and it's totally risk-free. We'll be happy to send them as many books as they think they can sell to parishioners or at fundraisers or whatever. Any books they don't sell, we will have shipped back to us and compensate them 100% for everything. So there's no risk, and we found that if you get this book into parishioners' hands, they love it, and they'll get it.
And they'll learn a thing or two about life in Vatican City.
There's a lot of great stories in the book, really.
Absolutely amazing. So the book is The Vatican Cookbook. Thomas Kelly, co-author, is joining us. Thanks so much for your time today and telling us about it.
Wyatt, thank you.
Sure. Staying with the Vatican, just in time for Holy Week, the Vatican Museums reopened a relic related to the crucifixion of Christ. The faithful now can ascend the holy stairs for the first time in 300 years. Tradition holds they are the steps Jesus climbed on his way to be crucified. The deeply worn holy stairs have a new marble covering and were unveiled today after a 7-year restoration project. Finally tonight, a leaking roof destroyed the organ of a church in Midtown Detroit. Then came the good news. As Detroit Catholic reports, behind the organ, obscured by its pipes, was a beautiful stained glass window. It depicts the crucifixion of Christ and had been hidden for more than 50 years. The pastor says St. Josephat Church still needs an organ. For now, it's using a keyboard hooked up to speakers. But he says, rest assured that when the new instrument arrives, it will not cover up the stained glass window. Always amazing to see discoveries hidden in Catholic churches from decades past. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight and for this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back on Monday, Holy Monday, with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.